There is a specific, rhythmic hum that a $50 million pharmaceutical freezer makes when it's keeping vaccines alive. For 15 years, that sound was my lullaby. Then, a 32-year-old VP named Kalen handed me a cardboard box and told me my safety protocols were legacy bloat. He thought he was simply escorting a disgruntled employee out of the building to boost his quarterly margins. He didn't realize he was actually walking out the only human key to a federal biometric lock. Before I tell you how my forced resignation accidentally held a billion-dollar supply chain hostage, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had your years of experience dismissed as old school, hit that subscribe button. You're going to enjoy the silence that comes next. My name is Dr. Eris Thorne. And for 15 years, I have served as the chief systems architect for the Midwest's largest pharmaceutical distribution hub. But as I sit in this glass-walled conference room on the 42nd floor, I realize that to the man across from me, I am no longer the engineer who built the engine. I'm just a rusty cog waiting to be replaced. The room itself was designed to intimidate, a hermetically sealed cage suspended above the frantic activity of the warehouse floor, isolating the executives from the noise of the industry that paid their salaries. From up here, the forklifts looked like toys, and the people looked like ants, a perspective that suited Kalen perfectly. Kalen was the new Vice President of Innovation, a title that sounded impressive on LinkedIn, but mostly meant he was an expert in dismantling things he didn't understand. He was 32, dressed in a bespoke suit that fit too perfectly, and he possessed the restless, jittery energy of someone who had never actually built anything with his own hands. Next to him sat Silas, his shadow, a 20-something IT lead, who treated the server architecture like a video game he was trying to speedrun. The air in the room was stale, recycled, and thick with the tension of a guillotine blade waiting to drop. I didn't need to be a psychic to know why I was there. I could see it in the way Kalen refused to meet my eyes, focusing instead on the tablet in front of him, his fingers swiping aggressively through charts that I knew were manipulated to show inefficiency. "Dr. Thorne," Kalen finally said, his voice smooth, practiced, and utterly devoid of warmth. "We've been reviewing the operational latency of the distribution hub. The numbers are concerning." He didn't wait for me to respond. He spun the tablet around to face me. The graph showed a flatline stability. To him, stability looked like stagnation. "We are in a race, Eris. Amazon, FedEx, the drone startups, they are eating our market share because they move fast. You have built a system that is safe, yes, but it is slow, it is heavy. It is burdened by what we call legacy bloat." He spat the words out like they tasted of ash. Legacy bloat. That was what he called the FDA-mandated safety redundancies I had spent 15 years perfecting. That was what he called the triple-check algorithms that ensured a vial of live virus vaccine didn't cook on a loading dock in July. He wasn't looking at a safety net. He was looking at a tangled mess of wires that was slowing down his bonus check. I sat very still, my posture rigid. My hands were folded in my lap, concealed beneath the table so he couldn't see the white-knuckle grip I had on my own fingers. "The latency is intentional, Kalen," I said, my voice surprised by its own calmness. "It's not bloat, it's a heartbeat. The system pauses to verify the thermal integrity of every single unit before it leaves the cold zone. If you remove that pause, you aren't optimizing the system, you are blinding it." Silas snorted, a derisive sound from the corner of the room. "We can do those checks in the cloud, Eris," he said, not even looking up from his laptop. "We don't need hardware-level handshakes every 3 seconds. It's archaic. It's like using a rotary phone to send a tweet." I looked at Silas, really looked at him. I saw a boy who thought the cloud was magic, not just someone else's computer. He didn't understand that when you are dealing with biohazards, the cloud doesn't care if the server room in Ohio loses power. The hardware does. Kalen slid a thick, cream-colored envelope across the table. It stopped just inches from my hand. "We are restructuring the technology division," he said, the corporate script finally taking over completely. "We are moving to a lean, agile framework. Your role as chief architect is being dissolved, effective immediately." He paused, waiting for the explosion, waiting for the begging. "We have prepared a generous severance package. It includes full vesting of your stock options, provided you sign the non-disparagement agreement and," he glanced at Silas, "surrender all access credentials immediately." Silas was already typing. I could feel it. He was in the admin console right now, stripping my permissions, deleting my accounts, wiping my digital fingerprints from the building I had birthed. It felt like a physical violation, a phantom limb being severed while I was still awake. But I didn't beg. I didn't scream. I stood up slowly, feeling the ache in my knees that had spent hours on concrete floors debugging server racks. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my ID badge. It was heavy, scratched, the lamination peeling at the corners. It was a relic of a time when this company valued durability over disruption. I placed it on the envelope. "You have the documentation," I said quietly. "The backup protocols are in the physical safe in the server room. Do not lose the physical keys, Kalen." He waved his hand dismissively. "We won't need keys where we're going, Eris. Everything is digital now." I looked at him one last time, memorizing the arrogance on his face. He had no idea what he had just done. He thought he had just fired an employee. He didn't realize he had just removed the firing pin from a loaded grenade. The walk out of the executive wing was a study in isolation. The glass doors slid open with a whisper, and the noise of the facility hit me. A chaotic, mechanical roar that usually sounded like music to me. Today, it sounded like a warning. I walked along the mezzanine walkway, looking down at the miles of conveyor belts. Blue totes were whizzing by, carrying insulin to the packing stations. Robots were pivoting and lifting. It was a ballet of logistics, and I was the choreographer who had just been banned from the theater. I saw Garrett down on the floor, wearing his high-visibility vest, arguing with a forklift driver. Garrett was the floor manager, a man who had been here as long as I had. He looked up, sensing eyes on him, and saw me walking toward the exit with nothing but my purse. He froze. He saw the empty look on my face, the lack of a laptop bag, the stiffness of my shoulders. He took a step toward the stairs, his face crumpling in confusion. I locked eyes with him and gave a sharp, almost imperceptible shake of my head. "No. Don't come up here. Don't taint yourself." He stopped, his hand hovering in the air, and then slowly lowered it. He understood. In this new regime, loyalty to the old guard was a fireable offense. I walked past the security desk. The guard, a man I had exchanged pleasantries with for a decade, looked down at his shoes. He had already been notified. My access was red-flagged. I was a stranger. I stepped out into the humid Illinois heat, the heavy steel door clicking shut behind me. It was the sound of a prison cell closing, but I wasn't sure if I was the one being locked out or if they were the ones being locked in. I walked to my car, a 10-year-old sedan that sat in the far corner of the lot. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, just gripping the steering wheel, breathing in the smell of old upholstery in silence. I didn't cry. Crying is for when you lose something you can get back. This was final. But as the shock began to fade, a different feeling replaced it. A cold, sharp clarity. Kalen and Silas had been so thorough, so eager to revoke my email and my server access, that they had forgotten the most basic rule of the FDA regulations governing this facility. Rule 14B, Chain of Custody. The law required a certified human architect to verify the safety logs of the biohazard containment units every 72 hours. It was a digital dead man's switch. If I didn't sign in, if I didn't place my hand on the scanner and verify that the building was safe, the system would assume the worst. It would assume the humans were gone, and it would do exactly what I programmed it to do, to save the medicine. I started the car. The clock on the dashboard read 10:14 a.m. The countdown had begun. The first 24 hours were the hardest, not because of what was happening, but because of what wasn't. I was sitting in my kitchen, surrounded by the deafening silence of a Tuesday morning at home. I should have been in the server room. I should have been monitoring the nitrogen levels. Instead, I was drinking tea and watching the birds fight over a feeder. But I wasn't entirely blind. I opened my laptop and navigated to the public transparency portal. Because the company handled critical medical supplies, they were legally required to publish real-time operational data for hospitals to track their shipments. It was a read-only feed, useless for controlling the system, but perfect for diagnosing it. What I saw made my stomach turn. Kalen hadn't wasted a second. The graph showing throughput velocity was climbing at an impossible angle. It was up 15%, then 20%. He was redlining the engines. I knew exactly what Silas had done. He had gone into the root code and disabled the inter-process delays. He had turned off the safety handshakes. In his mind, he was optimizing code. In reality, he was stripping the insulation off a live wire. The facility was moving faster than it ever had, yes. But it was running blind. I watched the energy consumption metrics for Sector 4, the ultra-cold storage for chemotherapy drugs. The power usage was spiking. The cooling units were fighting a losing battle against the heat generated by the overclocked motors and the rapid cycling of the airlock doors. Kalen was probably popping champagne right now, showing the board of directors that he had achieved in 24 hours what I hadn't achieved in 15 years. He was trading safety for speed, gambling that the coin would land on heads forever. By Wednesday evening, the 48-hour mark, the euphoria inside the building must have been palpable, but the data on my screen told a different story. The fever had set in. The vibration sensors on the main sorting arm were registering micro-tremors. To an untrained eye, it looked like noise. To me, it looked like a machine that was shivering. My phone buzzed on the counter. I stared at it. It was a text from a number I didn't have saved, but I knew the area code. It was Garrett. Boss. Something's wrong. The floor is vibrating. Robots are missing pics. New guy says it's just calibration errors. We're scared. I stared at the message for a long time. My thumb hovered over the reply button. I wanted to tell him to hit the emergency stop. I wanted to tell him to get his people out of the automated zones. But I couldn't. If I sent that text, I was interfering. If I gave advice and something went wrong, Kalen's lawyers would paint me as a saboteur. I had to be a ghost. I had to let them drive the car off the cliff because if I grabbed the wheel now, they would blame me for the crash. I put the phone face down. I'm sorry, Garrett. The system was now in phase 2 of the protocol. Solicitation. It was actively searching for me. Deep in the server logic, the AI was pinging my biometric ID. Where is the architect? It checked the primary terminal. Null. It checked the remote access VPN. Access denied. It checked the backup security logs. Empty. The system was getting nervous. It was designed to be paranoid. It was holding millions of dollars of volatile chemicals. It wasn't allowed to be optimistic. Without my signature, the system began to assume the facility had been compromised. Maybe a hostile takeover. Maybe a biological leak that had incapacitated the crew. It began to prep the countermeasures. The cooling fans ramped up to maximum, preparing for a hard freeze. The magnetic locks on the blast doors silently charged their capacitors. The beast was waking up, and the people walking inside its belly had no idea. Thursday morning broke with a sky the color of a bruise. The air was heavy, humid, the kind of weather that makes machinery sweat. I woke up at 5 a.m., unable to sleep. Today was the day. The 72-hour window would close at 9 a.m. sharp. I made coffee, my hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of anticipation. I set up my command center at the kitchen table, my laptop showing the public data feed, the television tuned to the local financial news, and my phone, silent and waiting. On the TV, a reporter was standing outside the facility gates. The chyron read, "Pinnacle Logistics shares soar on efficiency record." The reporter was beaming. "Investors are calling it a new dawn for the logistics giant," she chirped. "Trucks are moving out at record speed." I looked at the time. 8:58 a.m. 2 minutes. Inside the facility, the morning shift was in high gear. I could picture it perfectly. Kalen standing on the observation deck, hands in his pockets, surveying his kingdom. Silas sitting in my old chair, feet up on the desk, thinking he had tamed the dragon. The trucks were lined up at the loading docks, their engines idling, waiting for the pallets of insulin and vaccines. 8 hours, 59 minutes and 30 seconds. The system sent one final query. Verification required. Biohazard Protocol 14B. Awaiting biometric handshake. It waited 1 second. 2 seconds. Silence. The logic gate closed. The condition changed from active to compromised. 9 a.m. It didn't start with an alarm, it started with a slam. On the television screen, behind the reporter, I saw the first sign. The massive bay doors behind the loading trucks didn't just close, they dropped like guillotines. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was audible even through the reporter's microphone. She spun around, startled. "Whoa, looks like they're closing up shop a bit early," she joked nervously. But then, the lights changed. Through the windows of the facility, the bright, clinical white light vanished, replaced instantly by a pulsing, deep crimson containment mode. On my laptop, the data stream turned into a wall of red text. Lock down. I knew exactly what was happening inside. The conveyor belts had slammed to a halt, likely throwing packages onto the floor. The magnetic locks on every exit had engaged with 2,000 pounds of force. The air conditioning, which had been struggling, was now bypassed by the emergency nitrogen injection system. The facility wasn't trying to keep people comfortable anymore. It was trying to save the medicine. It was dropping the temperature to -20 degrees to preserve the biological assets in a state of suspended animation until authorities could arrive. The reporter on TV was no longer smiling. We are hearing alarms," she shouted over the noise. "The trucks are locked out. I can see people inside banging on the glass." My phone sat on the table. It was still silent. Kalen was currently in the denial phase. He was screaming at Silas to fix it. He was probably rebooting his tablet. He thought it was a glitch. He didn't realize that the building had just arrested him. I took a sip of my coffee. It was hot, bitter, and tasted like victory. I watched the red lights pulse on my screen, counting the seconds until the bargaining phase began. It wouldn't be long now. The temperature inside was dropping fast, and the only heat source left in the building was the panic rising in Kalen's chest. The phone ringing on my granite countertop didn't startle me. I had been watching it for the last 10 minutes, counting the seconds between the red warning lights flashing on my laptop screen and the inevitable human reaction that would follow. When the vibration finally buzzed against the stone, it felt less like an interruption and more like a validation. The caller ID flashed the name I expected, Kalen Vance. I didn't answer immediately. In the corporate world, speed is often mistaken for efficiency, but silence is the ultimate display of power. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the device buzz until it went to voicemail. I imagined him on the other end, his manicured fingers trembling as he redialed, his mind racing through excuses and legal threats. When it rang a second time, exactly 12 seconds later, I picked it up. I didn't say hello. I didn't ask who was calling. I simply brought the phone to my ear and listened to the sound of a world collapsing. "Eris, pick up the damn phone!" Kalen's voice was unrecognizable. The smooth, practiced baritone of the boardroom was gone, replaced by a high-pitched, breathless shriek that cracked under the weight of sheer terror. Behind him, the background noise was a cacophony of disaster, industrial klaxons blaring a rhythmic whoop-whoop, the hiss of hydraulic seals, and shouting voices echoing in a cavernous space. "Give me the override code! Right now! The system is locking us out! It says unauthorized presence. I am the vice president, for God's sake, unlock it." He was hyperventilating, the panic stripping away his buzzwords and leaving only a frightened child who had broken a very expensive toy. I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the calm serenity of my garden, a stark contrast to the hellscape I knew Kalen was standing in. "There is no code, Kalen," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. "Stop typing, stop screaming. Listen to me." The authority in my voice, honed by 15 years of commanding that floor, made him pause. The shouting on his end subsided slightly. "What you are experiencing is not a bug. It is a feature. Specifically, it is FDA Compliance Protocol 14B. The system has detected that the facility is unsupervised because the Chief Architect biometric token hasn't been renewed in 72 hours. It assumes the humans are gone. It assumes the medicine is vulnerable. So, it is doing exactly what I programmed it to do. It is turning the building into a vault." "Unsupervised?" Kalen sputtered, the indignation trying to fight through the fear. "Silas is right here. We have admin access. We are logging in as root users." "Silas has software access," I corrected him, enjoying the precision of the explanation. "Protocol 14B operates on the kernel level. It doesn't care about your passwords or your admin privileges. It is looking for a specific heartbeat. It is looking for a specific retinal pattern. Mine. And since you fired the only person the system trusts, the system has decided to trust no one." I paused, letting the reality sink in. "The nitrogen injection sequence will begin in 8 minutes. It's designed to displace the oxygen to prevent fire and oxidation of the chemicals. If you are still on the floor when that happens, the sensors will classify you as organic contamination. I suggest you evacuate." The line went dead. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't threaten to sue me. He simply dropped the phone. Or perhaps he started running. I set the device down on the table. The first domino had fallen. Now, I waited for the king. It took 4 minutes for the second call to come through. This time, the name on the screen was Chairman Halloway. The ringtone seemed heavier, more serious. Halloway was a man who viewed emotion as an inefficiency, so I knew this conversation would be different. It would be a transaction. I answered on the first ring. "Mr. Chairman?" I said, acknowledging him before he could speak. "Dr. Thorne." Halloway's voice was icy, controlled, but I could hear the tight wire of tension underneath. "The police have shut down the interstate. We have 40 trucks backed up to the county line. The media is reporting a biochemical incident at the hub. Our stock has dropped 12% in the last hour." He didn't waste time asking what happened. He was smart enough to know. "Kalen says you sabotaged the network. He says you planted a logic bomb." "Kalen is mistaken," I replied, keeping my tone professional. "I didn't plant a bomb. I built a safety harness. You cut the rope. The system requires a certified human verification every 3 days. You removed the human. The system is simply prioritizing the safety of the assets over the convenience of the executives. It is preserving the inventory. Mr. Chairman, it is saving you from an FDA violation that would revoke your operating license permanently." There was a long silence on the other end. Halloway was doing the math. He was calculating the cost of the lost inventory, the cost of the PR disaster, and the cost of his own pride. "The nitrogen purge," he said quietly. "Can you stop it?" "I can," I said. "But not from here. And not as a former employee." "What do you want?" The question was blunt. The surrender was absolute. "I want a conversation," I said. "In the parking lot. In 20 minutes, bring a pen." I drove to the facility with the radio off. The silence in the car was heavy, filled only with the hum of the tires on the asphalt. As I approached the exit for the distribution hub, the scale of the disaster became physical. The line of refrigerated trucks stretched for miles, a gleaming silver snake of commerce paralyzed by a single line of code. Police cruisers were blocking the entrance, their blue lights flashing against the gray sky. I rolled down my window as I approached the checkpoint. The guard, Miller, looked pale. When he saw me, his face flooded with relief. He didn't ask for identification. He frantically waved me through, moving the barricade aside as if I were royalty returning from exile. The employee parking lot was a scene of organized chaos. The office staff had been evacuated and were huddled in groups near the fence, watching the building with fearful eyes. The facility itself looked dormant, but I knew better. The red emergency strobes were pulsing behind the blast-proof windows, a rhythmic heartbeat of warning. Near the main entrance, isolated from the rest of the staff, stood a small cluster of men in expensive suits. Kalen was there, looking disheveled, his tie missing, shouting into 2 phones at once. Silas sat on the curb, his head buried in his hands, a laptop lying closed next to him like a tombstone. And standing apart from them, watching my car approach with the stillness of a statue, was Chairman Halloway. I parked my 10-year-old sedan next to Kalen's brand new Porsche. I took a moment to check my appearance in the mirror. I smoothed my hair. I adjusted my glasses. I stepped out into the humid air, carrying nothing but my purse and a single sheet of paper. Halloway walked to meet me. Up close, he looked tired. The invincible aura of the boardroom was gone, replaced by the grim reality of a man watching his fortune evaporate. "Dr. Thorne," Halloway said, his voice drowned out slightly by the distant wail of sirens. "We are 5 minutes away from the nitrogen purge. If that happens, the facility is offline for weeks. The cleanup alone will cost millions. Then we should hurry," I said calmly. I didn't look at Kalen, who had stopped shouting and was now staring at me with a mixture of hatred and desperation. I handed the paper to Halloway. It wasn't a complex legal document. It was a single page, bulleted, clear, and non-negotiable. Terms of reinstatement. Halloway read aloud, his eyes scanning the page rapidly. 5-year contract. Double salary. Full vesting of all prior stock options. And, he paused, looking up at me, complete and absolute autonomy over all technical systems and personnel decisions. No executive override. "And one more thing," I said, pointing toward Kalen and Silas. "The immediate termination of the current VP of Innovation and the lead IT administrator. For cause gross negligence and endangerment of corporate assets, they tampered with a federal safety system. They are liabilities." Kalen lunged forward. "You can't do that! I am an officer of this company. You can't just sign it," Halloway said, his voice cutting through Kalen's protest like a razor. "Shut up, Kalen. Just shut up." Holloway pulled a gold fountain pen from his jacket pocket. He didn't hesitate. He placed the paper on the hood of my car and signed his name with a flourish that felt like a surrender treaty. He handed the paper back to me. "It's done. Now, please, open the door." I took the paper, folded it neatly, and placed it in my purse. "Wait here," I said. I walked past Kalen. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, waiting for me to acknowledge him, to argue with him. I gave him nothing. No anger, no smirk. I simply walked past him as if he were a piece of furniture that had been left out on the curb for trash collection. The walk to the main blast doors felt different this time. 3 days ago, I had walked away from them feeling like a failure. Now, the gravel crunching under my shoes sounded like victory. The doors were massive, reinforced steel slabs that were currently sealed with magnetic locks capable of withstanding a bomb blast. To the right of the doors was a small, unassuming black panel. Silas had probably spent hours trying to hack this panel, trying to find a USB port or a keypad, but there was no keypad. I stood in front of the scanner. The red emergency lights from inside the lobby cast a hellish glow through the reinforced glass. I could see the countdown timer on the wall inside. Nitrogen purge in 0:59. I raised my right hand and placed my palm flat against the black glass. The sensor hummed. A beam of blue light traced the geometry of my hand, measuring the length of my fingers, the heat of my skin. It wasn't just checking a fingerprint, it was checking for life. It was checking for the specific biological signature that had been hard-coded into the system's foundation 15 years ago. The screen flashed. I leaned forward. The retinal scanner flared to life, a red beam sweeping across my eye. I didn't blink. I stared into the red light, the eye of the machine I had built. A voice, synthetic but warm, echoed from the speaker, loud enough for Holloway and Kalen to hear in the silent parking lot. Identity confirmed. "Welcome back, Architect Thorne. Supervisor status, active. Emergency protocol suspended." The sound of the magnetic locks disengaging was visceral, a heavy, metallic thunk that vibrated through the soles of my feet. The hiss of pneumatic pressure releasing sounded like a heavy sigh. Slowly, agonizingly, the massive steel doors groaned and began to slide open. The red light from inside spilled out onto the pavement, and then, as the doors fully retracted, the red vanished. The interior lights flickered and turned a brilliant, clinical white. The oxygen depletion alarm cut off instantly. The roar of the emergency fans died down, replaced by the gentle, rhythmic hum of the standard cooling units. I stepped across the threshold. The air inside was freezing, biting at my skin, but it was fresh. I walked to the main security console in the lobby. I didn't even sit down. I typed a single command string into the terminal. Behind me, the warehouse woke up. The conveyor belts beeped and began to move. The sorting arms whirred to life. The traffic jam of logistics began to untangle itself. I turned around. Holloway was standing in the doorway, shivering slightly, looking into the bright, functioning facility. Kalen was standing behind him, looking at the building like it was a monster that had just spared his life. "Get security," I said to Holloway, my voice echoing in the large hall. "Escort Mr. Vance and his assistant off the property. If they touch a keyboard, have them arrested." Holloway nodded. He didn't look at Kalen. He looked at me with a new understanding. He realized that he hadn't just hired an engineer, he had reinstated the landlord. The weeks that followed were a blur of reconstruction. I didn't waste time gloating. There was work to do. I spent the first 48 hours auditing the code, stripping out Silas's clumsy optimizations like pulling weeds from a garden. I restored the safety buffers. I recalibrated the sensors. I brought Garrett into my office and handed him the promotion letter personally. "You run the floor," I told him. "If you see something unsafe, you stop the line. No one overrules you. Not even me." The look on his face was worth more than the raise I had just negotiated. The facility returned to its rhythm. The legacy bloat that Kalen had despised was back, checking every vial, verifying every temperature, ensuring that safety was never sacrificed for speed. The stock price recovered. The trucks moved. The world forgot that for 3 hours, the medicine had almost stopped flowing. 1 month later, Holloway came to my office. He sat in the chair where Kalen had fired me. He looked uncomfortable. "Eris," he said, clearing his throat. "The board is asking about the protocol. The dead man's switch. Protocol 14B. I stopped typing and looked at him over the rim of my glasses. Yes? You removed it, right? He asked, trying to sound casual. We can't have the facility locking down again if, well, just in case. It's gone? I looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes. The fear of losing control, the fear that the machine was stronger than the man. I smiled, a small, professional smile. Of course, Mr. Chairman. It has been patched out. The code is clean. You have full control. Holloway let out a breath he had been holding. Good. Good. That's reassuring. Thank you, Eris. He stood up and left, walking with a lighter step. I waited until the door clicked shut. I turned back to my monitor. I opened the terminal window and navigated to the deepest layer of the system kernel, the place where the binary code touched the bare metal of the server. There, pulsing with a steady, green rhythm, was a single line of code. I hadn't removed it. I had renamed it. I had buried it under 1,000 layers of encryption that Silas couldn't have found in 100 lifetimes. Because I knew the truth. Men like Holloway and Kalen always forget. They forget that efficiency is not a substitute for resilience. They forget that you cannot cheat the laws of physics or the requirements of safety. Someday, maybe 5 years from now, maybe 10, another Kalen will walk through that door. He will talk about disruption. He will talk about cutting costs. He will try to fire the architect. And when he does, the system will be waiting. The fence is still there. The wolf is still at the door. And I am the only one holding the key. I closed the terminal, took a sip of my coffee, and listened to the beautiful, rhythmic hum of a system that was working exactly as it was designed to. In a world obsessed with noise and disruption, sometimes the most powerful move you can make is simply to stop holding up the walls and let them see who was really carrying the weight. Eris didn't need to scream to be heard. She just needed to leave. If you have ever been dismissed as legacy, or if you've ever had to silently walk away from a place that didn't respect your foundation, know that you are not alone. Sometimes, your absence teaches a lesson your presence never could. If this story spoke to you, please like, comment, and share it with someone who is still finding their own voice.